Young widow was auctioned for infertility until a Comanche father of 6 made her his everything. Clay Ridge, Wyoming, summer 1875. The sun was cruel, casting hard shadows over the dusty heart of Clay Ridge, a mining town that clung to the illusion of civility like a drunk clutches a Bible. At the center of the town square, a wooden platform stood tall, not for cattle or oratory, but for punishment wrapped in law. A crowd buzzed with anticipation. Merchants, miners, wives with pressed skirts and sharper tongues, they all gathered for the spectacle, a woman, not quite guilty, not quite innocent, but convenient to blame. Maria stood on the platform, wrists loosely bound, her dress wrinkled and faded from nights sleeping on borrowed floors. 25 years old, a widow of 5 years, with no children and even less luck. "This here is Maria Gray," the auctioneer shouted. "Debtor, litigator, and failure of a wife. Up for bid, by order of the court, to repay what she owes this town." Men in the crowd snorted. "She tried suing the mine after her husband died," one scoffed. "Thought her tears were worth a fortune." "She's cursed," a woman hissed. 5 years, no baby. Now she's God's mistake and Clay Ridge's debt." Maria didn't blink. Her husband had died in the collapse of Shaft 3, crushed beneath timber that should have been replaced. She had sold their house, pawned her ring, and borrowed from every soul willing to lend, just to hire a lawyer from Cheyenne. She had demanded justice. She had lost. And when she could not pay her debts, when even her dignity had no value, she was dragged out for repayment, one body in place of coin. $5 to start," the auctioneer shouted. "For a fine set of hands, a sharp mind, and a mouth that knows too much." No one moved. "Too skinny," someone called. "She'll break before breakfast." "Useless womb," another sneered. "Even her husband couldn't plant seed in her." Maria swallowed hard, but her spine stayed straight. Let them have their bile. Let them rot in it. Then came hoofbeats. Slow, deliberate, from the eastern road. The crowd shifted as a tall man on horseback appeared, followed by 6 children, some riding small ponies, others walking with silent steps. They wore soft leather and earth-colored cloth. They were Comanche. The man dismounted near the edge of the square. His face was stern, marked by weather and war. He tied his horse and walked forward, children trailing behind him like shadows. "What the hell does that redskin want?" a miner barked. "He's got no business here," another growled. The man did not answer. He kept walking, eyes fixed on Maria. Behind him the children stood close, the youngest a girl of maybe 5, holding her brother's hand and staring up at the platform. "Turn around, savage," someone shouted. "This is white man's law." A few men picked up tools, took a step forward. The children tensed, but did not scatter. Maria's heart clenched when the youngest girl looked up at her and gave the smallest wave. The man stepped in front of the auctioneer. "I offer my horse," he said, his voice low but clear, "in exchange for her." The square exploded in laughter. "A damn horse? For that?" a rancher bellowed. "You sure you don't want your saddle back too?" someone jeered. "She ain't worth a shovel of manure," spat an old woman. But the man, Lone Elk, stood unmoved. He pointed to the Appaloosa tied nearby, strong and calm despite the noise. Its coat shimmered with good health, muscles taut under a fine hide. The auctioneer raised an eyebrow. "Name?" "The Lone Elk." "What do you want with her? She's no good to you. She's a debt, a lawsuit, and a dry riverbed." Lone Elk looked up at Maria. His voice softened, but not his resolve. "I have 6 children. They need warmth, kindness. I do not need her body to make more. I need her spirit, to keep them whole." Silence stretched. The auctioneer looked around. "Anyone else want to bid? Anyone care to beat a horse?" No one spoke. One man spit in the dirt. Another turned away in disgust. "Fine," the auctioneer said. "Trade accepted. Take her, and get the hell out of Clay Ridge before nightfall." Maria's wrists were freed. The rope burned, but she did not wince. She stepped down from the platform slowly, the crowd parting without ceremony. Lone Elk did not extend his hand. He simply waited. She looked at him, then at the children. The littlest girl now stood at the front, eyes wide with hope, not fear. Maria stepped forward, not because she believed in salvation, but because she had nothing left to lose, and maybe something still to give. She placed her hand in his. And together they walked away, not as master and property, but as two castaways the world had tried to drown, choosing instead to carry each other. The ride was long and quiet. Maria sat on the borrowed Appaloosa, its reins loose in her fingers, while Lone Elk led the way through winding trails and tall grass. Behind them came the children, 6 of them, like a moving silence. Not one spoke, not one questioned why a stranger rode ahead of them. The sun dipped low by the time they reached the edge of Comanche land. Trees parted to reveal a small wooden house tucked near a ridge. It was not large, but it was cared for. The porch swept, firewood stacked neatly, a wind chime of bones and feathers whispering in the breeze. Lone Elk dismounted and gestured for Maria to follow. She slid off the horse, legs stiff, body sore from tension she had not released since the square. The children stayed back, their eyes curious but cautious. He opened the door. This way. Inside, the home was spare but warm. One large common room with a stone hearth, a table of carved pine, and bedding tucked into the corners. Herbs hung from the ceiling, and on one wall was a painting, not of a person, but a mountain, bold and unmoving. He pointed to a separate corner curtained with wool cloth. You sleep there, alone. Maria nodded once. Thank you. He glanced at her, not coldly but not kindly either. You are not here to replace anyone. They had a mother. You are here because they need steadiness. From behind him, small feet shuffled. The children crept to the doorway, not entering, just watching, whispering in their language. Is she staying? Why did he bring her? Is she like mother? Maria caught enough to understand. She kept her eyes low, her hands still. She didn't want to frighten them or pretend she was something she wasn't. Lone Elk answered them without turning. She stays because you need more than I can give. She is not your mother, but she is not your enemy. Dinner was a silent affair. Maria offered to cook and was given dried meat, beans, and squash. She worked slowly, cautiously. As the stew simmered, she saw movement out of the corner of her eye. The second youngest, a wiry boy with sharp cheeks, sprinkling a heavy pinch of salt into the pot. He looked up, mischievous and daring, waiting for her to explode. Maria said nothing. She stirred the stew gently and served it with equal care. When it came time to eat, she swallowed spoonfuls of the overly salted broth without flinching. The boy stared. She offered him a piece of bread without a word. Lone Elk noticed. He said nothing, but his gaze lingered on her longer than before. After the children were tucked into their bedrolls and the fire began to die, Maria slipped behind the wool curtain to the space she'd been given. It was simple. A woven mat, a folded blanket, a small basket. She sat cross-legged, brushing the dirt from her dress, letting the day fall off her shoulders. Then, a small sound. The curtain rustled. A tiny hand pulled it aside. It was the youngest girl. She pattered across the floor in bare feet, dragging a worn doll behind her. Without asking, she crawled onto Maria's mat and lay down beside her. Maria blinked. The child curled up, sighed, then whispered, "You smell like my mama." Maria froze. Her hands trembled, just slightly. Then she reached over and gently tucked the blanket around the girl's shoulders. The child snuggled closer. From across the room, Lone Elk stood watching in the shadowed firelight, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. But in the silence, Maria felt something shift. Not spoken, not claimed, but real. She closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she didn't dream of fire or rope or falling. She dreamed of 6 pairs of eyes watching, not with judgment, but with a quiet kind of hope. The morning was sharp with wind when Lone Elk told Maria to ride with them into the hills. She had expected to be left behind, to stay near the hearth, boil herbs, tend to the younger ones. But today he handed her a water skin and nodded toward the horse. "We cut wood." She mounted behind the second oldest boy, a quiet child named Kuan. The eldest, Natan, led the way beside his father, while the third, Ezra, brought up the rear with 2 hatchets strapped to his back. They rode in silence, as always. The trail climbed through pine and dust, the sound of hoofbeats echoing off stone. Maria tried not to let the stillness bother her, but it pressed, heavy. These boys didn't chatter, they didn't ask questions. They watched, measured, waited. After an hour they reached a stand of deadfall trees strewn across a slope. Lone Elk dismounted first, handed out tools, then gestured to Maria. "You stay close, slope's loose." She nodded. For a while the rhythm of work filled the quiet, axes striking, branches snapping, boots scraping over dirt. Maria gathered kindling, stacked it, wiped sweat with her sleeve. She wanted to help, to be useful, to belong somehow. She stepped toward a log just above the others, her boots sliding slightly. She reached for it. Then her foot gave way. The slope crumbled under her, gravel skidding fast. She shouted once, her arms flailing. In a blink she tumbled down the embankment, scraping against bark and rock. Lone Elk moved before the boys even reacted. He reached her just as she hit a thicket, scooping her up before she could slide farther. His grip was firm, steady. Maria gasped, clinging to his shoulder. "You all right?" She nodded breathlessly, blood at her elbow, a rip in her dress. He glanced at her boots. "Next time, do not wear riding shoes into the mountain." His tone was dry, but his eyes, they were not angry, just watching her, like he had not stopped since the day in Clay Ridge. He helped her back to her feet. For the rest of the climb, she stayed closer. By midday, clouds gathered fast over the ridgeline. Thunder rolled in low pulses. Lone Elk frowned and signaled to pack up. "We go, now." But the storm came too fast. Before they reached the horses, the sky opened with cold, pelting rain. Nathan pointed toward a split in the cliffside. "There, the cave." They scrambled under cover, water already soaking through fabric. The boys huddled near the back wall, shivering. Maria's hands were numb. She saw Ezra's lips blue, his body shaking. Quickly she pulled matches from her belt pouch, struck one against the stone, once, twice, until a flame caught. She fed it with dry bark from her skirt, building it up with her breath. Then she knelt beside Ezra, pulled the end of her dress over his shoulders, shielding him from the wind. "It's okay," she whispered. "Storms pass. Just breathe with me." Ezra looked up at her, blinking through the cold. Lone Elk stood near the mouth of the cave, watching. Raindrops ran down his face, unnoticed. But something shifted in his expression, a softness that had not been there before. Maria didn't see him smile, but he did. Just a little. The fire crackled low. Steam rose from their soaked boots. Nathan sat beside his father, legs drawn to his chest. For a long time he said nothing. Then he leaned slightly, voice barely above the rain. "She's not our mother," he said. Lone Elk nodded once. "But she listens," Nathan added. "Mother used to do that too." Lone Elk said nothing, but his gaze lingered on Maria, her dress muddy and torn, her arms around a child that did not come from her blood. And for the first time he wondered if perhaps belonging had less to do with origin and more to do with staying when the storm came. It began with a cough. By dusk, Ezra, the third child, had grown quiet, his laughter replaced with a wheeze that rattled in his chest. By dawn, he burned with fever, his skin hot as a sunlit stone. Maria felt it the moment she pressed her hand to his forehead. "He's too warm," she whispered. Lone Elk nodded grimly. "He's had sickness like this before. It can turn—" Without another word he began preparing herbs, drying roots, boiling bark. The other children watched from the corners of the room, their eyes wide with fear. Maria didn't wait to be asked. She wet cloths, sponged Ezra's face, fanned him with her hand when he moaned. The fever broke in waves, cruel and unrelenting. He thrashed through the night, crying out in Comanche and English, drenched in sweat, then shivering like ice. Maria did not sleep. Neither did Lone Elk. On the second night, the wind howled outside and the fire burned low. Maria wrung a cloth and wiped Ezra's chest gently. His breath came in short, panicked bursts. "Hush, little one," she said, stroking his damp hair. "You're not alone." Ezra's eyes fluttered open, dazed and wet. "Mom," he whispered. "Is that you?" Maria froze. Lone Elk looked up from across the room. Maria bit her lip, then leaned closer and whispered, "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who's here, and I'm not leaving." She turned away and wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist. But it was too late. Lone Elk had seen. He crossed the room and knelt beside her. Wordlessly, he handed her a cup of warm broth steeped with willow bark. She accepted it without looking at him. His hand touched her shoulder, gently, hesitantly. "My wife, Elizabeth," he said, voice low. "She cried like that, when Coa nearly died from snakebite. I remember how she would not sleep." Maria stiffened. She set the cup down, then stood abruptly. "I am not here to replace her." His eyes didn't leave hers. "I did not ask you to. You just let me stay. Feed your children, sleep under her roof." She took a shaky breath. "If I'm just a shadow of who she was, if that's what you want, I won't stay." Lone Elk's jaw clenched. Then he said quietly, "If you were just a shadow, I would not have panicked when you slipped on the mountain." Maria blinked. He continued, "I would not have watched your hands at the fire, or wondered what your voice would sound like singing." Her throat tightened, but she said nothing. Ezra stirred in his sleep, drawing their attention back. His breathing was steadier now, his fever slightly lower. Maria knelt again, wiping sweat from his temple. She stayed there, her head heavy, body aching. Lone Elk did not leave her side. By the time the fire dimmed again, Maria had fallen asleep, curled next to Ezra's bedroll, her arm still resting across the boy's chest. Lone Elk reached for a blanket. He unfolded it slowly, then draped it over her shoulders with deliberate care. She didn't stir. He sat beside the hearth. He did not sleep. He simply stayed. When dawn finally broke, it found him, still watching her, and something in his silence no longer looked like fear. It looked like choosing. The knock came just after noon, sharp and deliberate, against the wooden door. Lone Elk opened it to find 4 men standing outside, elders of the tribe, their braids silvered with age, eyes like river stones. Behind them stood a woman wrapped in red shawls, her mouth tight, her gaze cold. "May we enter?" the oldest asked. Lone Elk stepped aside without a word. Maria stood by the hearth, stirring corn mash. When she saw the strangers, her hands paused. The children stiffened. Even the air seemed to go still. The oldest elder spoke first. "You have brought a white woman into your home, into our lands, without counsel." "She was taken from the town," Lone Elk said. "She had nowhere else to go. She is not one of us. She has not claimed to be. I think she sleeps under your roof. Your children speak her tongue, and the youngest now calls her mother." The woman in the red shawl stepped forward. Her name was a Pony, once a healer, once a friend of Elizabeth, and once a woman who had quietly hoped Lone Elk would look her way. "She teaches them to write in English," a Pony said sharply, "to read from books brought by wagon. She tells stories not of our grandmothers, but of kings and western queens." Maria looked up. "I tell them what I know. I teach them to read, because the laws they'll face outside this land are written in English and made by men who will not care where they come from." The elders exchanged looks. "They have our tongue." "They need both," Maria said firmly. "They need to survive." "Survival is not betrayal," Lone Elk added. A Pony turned to the children. "And what do you say? Has she taught you to be proud of who you are, or ashamed?" Kuan looked away. Ezra bit his lip. Natan crossed his arms. "And she helps with our letters," Natan said. "She never mocks what we know." "She makes us wash before eating," Ezra muttered. "She says our songs are beautiful," the little girl added, softly. But not all the children spoke. And not all trusted Maria. A line had been drawn, not by her, but through her. The elders left without blessing or farewell. The next days were colder. Whispers followed Maria at the spring. Children who once waved now stared. And worst of all, the doubt that seeped into the corners of her own home. Conan stopped bringing her wildflowers. Ezra refused to be read to at night. Even Natan grew silent. Only the littlest stayed close, clutching Maria's skirts as if afraid she'd vanish. That night, Maria stood by the fire and spoke. "I never came here to replace anyone. I'm not your mother. I'm not Comanche. I know I'm not enough. But I'm not your enemy." Lone Elk listened from the doorway, his face unreadable. "I teach you because out there," she pointed to the hills, "there are men who will call you less, who will cheat you with ink and seals and signatures. I want you to know how to fight without touching a weapon." Silence. Then, a rock hit the wall. A second later, another slammed the shutters. The children screamed. Maria grabbed the youngest, pulling her close, shielding her. Lone Elk stormed out the door, his boot slamming against the porch. Outside, 3 young men stood with more stones in hand. One of them was the son of an elder, another a Pony's nephew. "She's making your house unclean," one shouted. "She's turning your blood to dust." Lone Elk didn't speak. He crossed the yard in 3 strides and struck the nearest man with a single brutal punch. The boy crumpled. The others backed away, stunned. "If you ever throw stone at my house again," Lone Elk growled, "you'll answer to more than my fists." Inside, Maria still held the children close, her breath shaking. Lone Elk returned, face cut on one cheek from a stray blow, fists bloodied. He didn't speak. He sat down beside the hearth, shoulders rising and falling. Maria looked at him, voice raw. "You'll be cast out for this." He looked at her then, truly looked. "Then I will not be alone." 3 months had passed. The wind no longer howled like a stranger outside the small wooden house tucked between prairie and pine. The earth had softened, the grass had grown tall, and so had something unspoken inside that home. A quiet thing, steady and real. Maria was no longer the woman who had been traded for a horse. She was the hand that smoothed Ezra's fevered brow when the boy stirred in his sleep. She was the voice that calmed Natan's shoulders after nightmares he refused to name. She was the hum that wrapped around them all on nights when coyotes howled too close to the ridge. And Lone Elk, he no longer stood at a distance. He waited for her when she walked back from the river with baskets of wet laundry. He watched her brush the youngest girl's hair before the first harvest dance, and when Maria reached for his hand in silence, he always met hers halfway. There had been no vows, no ceremony, just the soft rhythm of firewood cracked together, of laughter that returned in small pieces, and of two people learning to breathe again. It was on a morning in early autumn when it happened. Maria knelt beside the creek, scooping water into a basin, when a sudden wave of nausea struck her. The trees tilted, her stomach lurched. She knelt still for a moment, palm against the cool earth. She told herself it was nothing, a chill, a moment of weakness. But later, as she hung herbs above the hearth, her head swam again, her chest ached. Her senses sharpened oddly. The smell of pine made her dizzy. That night she leaned over the porch rail, pressing fingers to her lips. And panic bloomed inside her. "No," she whispered, "it's not possible." The next day, Lone Elk noticed her pale face, the way she moved slower. "You are not well," he said. "I am just tired. We go to Nessa, the healer?" She tried to protest, but the look in his eyes left no room. They rode in silence. Nessa was an elder woman, kind-eyed and skilled in medicine, who lived beside a stream with drawing flowers strung across her roof. Maria lay down while Nessa pressed her belly, asked questions, nodded slowly. Then came the words, gentle but sharper than any blade. "You are with child." Maria blinked. "No. I cannot be." Her voice cracked. "I was barren. I was told the doctor in Cheyenne said it was no use. I was the reason." Her hands trembled. Nessa said nothing, only placed a warm palm on hers. The ride home was quiet. Lone Elk asked no questions. Maria said little. She kept her hands in her lap, staring out at the rust-colored horizon. That night, she did not sleep beside him. She sat by the fire long after the others had gone to bed, arms wrapped around herself, eyes red and distant. A child, a possibility she had buried, a sentence that had once condemned her, now returned like a whisper from the earth itself. But what terrified her most was not the fear of pain or the danger of birth. It was the thought of telling him. What if he only loved her now because she had become what he lost? What if this changed everything? What if it made her something he needed, rather than someone he chose? So she kept the secret. She moved quietly, ate less, smiled carefully, and sat alone beneath a cottonwood tree by the stream, hands resting over her belly as the children played nearby. They laughed and chased each other, wild and free. The youngest girl ran toward her and clung to her legs, giggling. Maria smiled down at her, heart aching. Inside her, a new life stirred, one she had never believed she could carry. And outside her, a love already bloomed, one she feared she might lose the moment she said the truth aloud. The summons came at dawn. A rider brought the message, a slip of deerskin tied with red twine, the color used when a decision would change a man standing forever. Lone Elk read it once, then folded it, slowly. "They've called me before the council," he told Maria. She stood by the doorway, hands clenched in her shawl. "Why now?" "They know." He did not have to say it. The shift in her body, the whispers in the village. Someone had seen her with a hand over her stomach too long, or noticed the way she bent to the fire slower. "I will go with you," she said. He looked at her, not with surprise, but with something like quiet relief. The council sat in a wide ring beneath the great cedar, where verdicts had been spoken for generations. Elders, warriors, women of wisdom. A pony stood to the side, arms folded, lips pressed thin. Lone Elk entered first. Maria followed. Before either could speak, one of the elders, a man named Tahu, stepped forward. "You bring her among us still, after what we know?" Lone Elk's jaw tightened. "She has harmed no one. She carries a child of mixed blood, and she was not chosen by our rights. You defy tradition." Before he could answer, Maria stepped forward. Her voice shook, but she did not falter. "Do not blame him. This is mine, my doing." The crowd murmured. "I was not born to your people. I was not raised by your ways. But I have lived beside you. I have learned your soil, your songs, your fears. And I did not lie when I came here, but I hid. I believed I could not carry life, because others told me I was broken." She paused, breath trembling. "But I was not broken. I was just never loved the way love was meant to be. Not until here." She turned to Lone Elk. "Do not lose your place for what I carry." Then Lone Elk rose. He stood in silence for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. "She is not of our blood," he said finally, "and the child she carries will not be either. But she gave my children more than blood ever did." He looked around the circle, gaze steady. "She taught them to laugh again, to hope. She showed them gentleness when I forgot how. She taught me to forgive the dead and the living." He paused. "She never needed to bear a child to be a mother, but she has done it anyway." The council sat unmoving. Then a voice rang out from behind. "If you send her away," it was Natan, the eldest. He stepped into the circle, fists clenched. "If you make her go, I will go too." The silence deepened. "She's my mother now. You do not get to choose who we love." More murmurs followed. Ezra stepped forward next, then Kun. The littlest ran to Maria, wrapping her arms around her waist. Lone Elk looked at the elders once more. "Do what you must, but I will not leave her, and I will not make my children choose between blood and heart." No one spoke for a long while. Then the oldest woman in the circle, a midwife who had once delivered Lone Elk himself, whispered, "Blood gives life, but heart keeps it." And no one argued after that. The night was quiet, and the fire burned low. Maria gripped the wool blanket, her brow damp with sweat, breath ragged. Around her, the women of the tribe moved like wind, soft, steady, knowing. Lone Elk sat behind her, supporting her back with his chest, his arms bracing her through each wave. "You're doing well," the midwife whispered. "Almost there." Maria clenched her jaw, pushing as the pain split her like thunder. And then a cry, high and clear. A wail of life, fierce and beautiful. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could see him, her son. The midwife wrapped the child in deerskin and laid him in Maria's arms. He was small, red-faced, and perfect, fingers curled like leaves in spring. Lone Elk pressed his forehead to hers, silent, but his breath trembled. He reached down and touched his son's cheek, eyes wet. "He's here," Maria whispered. "He's real." Yes. That morning, the sun rose gold over the hills. Word spread fast. The children were the first to burst into the house, Nathan tripping over Kun, Ezra clutching a rattle. The littlest gasped and ran to the bundle. "He's so small," she cried. Maria laughed softly, her body weak but glowing. "Meet your brother." The older children hovered, hesitant. Natan stood with arms crossed, uncertain, until the baby yawned. Then even he smiled. Each child held him in turn, careful, reverent, like he was something the earth had given them in return for all it had taken. "He's the youngest of the tribe now," Ezra declared proudly. "Ours." That evening the sky turned to fire and copper. The harvest festival began with drums and singing, the scent of roasted corn and pine in the air. Maria sat by the fire, her newborn in her arms, dressed in a woven blanket gifted by the midwife. Lone Elk stood beside her, then reached down. She looked up. "Where?" He extended his hand. "With me." She took it. Together they walked into the circle, past the elders, past the curious eyes. The firelight danced across their joined fingers. The baby slept against her chest. Lone Elk turned to the people and spoke. "This is Maria," he said. "She came to us as an outsider. She stayed as a caregiver. She fought like a warrior. She loves as a mother. He looked down at her, then back to the tribe. I did not take her by right or law, but I have chosen her, not for duty, for heart. He paused, voice stronger now. She is my wife, not by paper, not by priest, by the fire we built together and by the life we now share. There was silence. Then a low murmur of assent, a nod from the midwife, a smile from one of the elders, and laughter from the children as they danced, wild and barefoot. Maria stood in that circle, no longer a guest, no longer a ghost. But someone claimed, not owned. Chosen. Weeks later, the fields turned amber with fall. Maria sat beneath the cottonwood tree, a journal in her lap. Her handwriting was crooked, fingers still sore from childbirth, but the words flowed easy now. I was once a woman traded for a horse, and now I am a mother of 7, a wife without ceremony, a teacher, a singer, a keeper of fire. I do not need blood to belong. I only needed to be seen and to stay. She looked up. Across the field, Lone Elk showed Ezra how to string a bow. The younger boys lined up to try. Natan corrected Cohen's posture. The littlest chased chickens near the porch, laughing. Her baby slept in a cradle beside her, breath soft and even. The wind stirred the golden grass. The house stood strong behind her, and her heart, once silent, now beat like a drum among many. She smiled. Love had found her not in a chapel or promise, but in the act of staying, of choosing, of returning, every single day. In the wild heart of the frontier, where names fade and borders shift, some truths endure. That love doesn't always arrive with vows or blessings. That family isn't just who you're born to, it's who you choose. And sometimes, the strongest homes are built not from blood, but from trust, sacrifice, and quiet devotion. Maria was once cast out for being empty, but in a world that tried to measure her worth, she gave it everything, and in return, she became more than a mother. She became a legend, whispered in Comanche winds. Thank you for watching this story from Wild West Love Stories. If it moved you, if it made you believe even for a moment in the kind of love that defies the odds, subscribe and hit the bell to join us for more untamed tales of the heart. Because out here, where bullets missed but hearts didn't, love always finds a way.